So I'm going to start off with the first question now is the Jordan versus LeBron comparison, and what are your opinions on that, Eric?
Oh wow. Now, like we mentioned last time, let's just say if I was a GM and you gave me prime LeBron, prime Jordan, or rookie LeBron, rookie Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
to these two guys to choose my first pick. Honestly, I can't make my decision right away. Like I would honestly have to say, you gotta give me these 1 or 2 days at least to think about it. So the best I can do right now is I can break down their games from what I can see. I'm not even sure at the end if I can actually make a decision because if you really compare these two players, their games are very different if you look from the outside. Like LeBron is kind of like your hybrid. The guy's a freak. He's got some of the highest basketball I could ever seen. He plays like a point guard, but at the same time, he's got the body of Karl Malone, but he's got the athleticism of Jordan. And he can sometimes be Magic, sometimes be Mike. It's kind of a
Yeah,
hybrid a little
sometimes I
bit.
think it's not even like it's not a good comparison because LeBron to me is like he's
Mm-hmm.
like a beefed up Oscar Robertson,
Mm-hmm.
basically that type
Mm-hmm.
of player.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, I mean, I'm sure like Jordan can rebound and assist, of course, but he's more of a scorer, right? He's more of the classic. I mean, he's just a elite scorer, right? So that's what kind of think that the comparison people always compare between the two, but they're not exactly comparable, right?
But here's the thing.
Yeah,
What I was trying to get at is from outward when we look at their games in
yeah.
terms of the way they play, they seem very different. But if you actually see their accomplishments
Hmm.
and the intangibles, they're actually really similar. For example, if you look at their PERs and some of their more advanced stats, these are only these two are the only two perimeter players
Hmm.
in history that probably exhibit such high PERs. And their PERs are very
Yeah.
similar. And in their careers, since rookie all the way to the prime, the way they exhibit this type of advanced stats are very similar too. And their accomplishments are very similar too. For example, if you look deeper a little bit, for example, these two guys, especially when LeBron was younger, these are two of the only perimeter players, along with, say, Scottie Pippen and a few other players, who their perimeter defense is so good they can affect the other team's execution and they can still guard one-on-one their own guy, especially LeBron when he was younger, closer to his prime,
Hmm.
and Jordan, obviously. Traditionally, a lot of perimeter players who are great defenders, if you actually watch them, they're either just one-on-one stoppers, but they're not always the best in terms of affecting the other team's entire execution. Because normally only big men like centers actually have that type of effect because they can block shots and affect shots.
Hmm.
There's only a handful of wing players and perimeter players that can actually shut down their own player and also hassle the entire opposing team's offensive execution. Scott Pippen was one of them. Pippen, Jordan, LeBron back in the day. These guys can actually guard up on their own guy, shut them down, but they can also know with their IQ and their length when to help on defense, when to double team, when to help on the block shot, and just really make a difference there. So they have a lot of these similarities. And the other thing we got to look at is a lot of people only remember Jordan in the last three championships when he was basically taking a lot of fadeaway jumpers and mid-range jump shots and posting up. But if you actually watch a lot of Michael Jordan when he was in the 80s, his stats were really similar to LeBron's. He's had seasons where he was like averaging about 7 rebounds, 7 assists a game, and over 30 points a game too,
I
and
think one
shooting over
season played
50%.
point guard or something. He averaged like 8 rebounds, 8 assists, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, the guy was all over the place. He was actually very similar to an all-around LeBron game back when he was younger in the 80s. The only reason why he actually ended up playing more of a traditional shooting guard scoring role later on was because of Phil Jackson. It was actually Phil
Yeah.
Jackson's decision to actually take him out of the paint. Because if you actually watched back in the 80s, especially when he was a rookie, a lot of
Hmm.
the coaches didn't even know how to use this guy. Because this guy, he can pass like a point guard if he really wants to. He can score like anybody out there. But he was also grabbing rebounds like a power forward. And he was blocking shots. If you actually saw Jordan when he won the Defensive Player of the Year award, he was actually blocking as many shots as most centers in the NBA that year. And during the 80s, if you watch, sometimes they actually put him in the paint.
Right.
And he was in the paint actually trying to block shots and affect shots because he jumps so high and he has such good anticipation. A large part of the reason is because when Jordan played in North Carolina, when Dean Smith actually coached players in North Carolina, during training, they don't really just talk about, okay, the scrimmage, who's going to win? Like, Team A, Team B, how many points you guys got. He also actually judges the players, how well you do, by a point system that's not based on scoring. For example, in the point system, getting a steal, getting a loose ball, or picking off a loose ball, getting rebounds, all these counts as a point along with scoring. So that's why a lot of North Carolina players back in Jordan's time, they were more worried about the all-around game, trying to accumulate points, trying to get the steals, trying to do the little things in basketball. And that's why they're such great players when they went to the NBA. And that's why they're all over the court. And that's similar to what LeBron does, because LeBron's a stat stuffer too.
Yeah.
So actually, when Jordan was in the 80s and compared to LeBron, they had very, very similar games. Very all around. They can rebound, they can pass, they can block shots. It was only Phil Jackson, because Phil Jackson wanted Jordan's career to be longer. So he actually took Jordan out of the paint and wanted to play more in the perimeter to lengthen his career, because he didn't want too much grind on Jordan's body. And that's the reason why Jordan actually eventually played more in the perimeter. But early on, his game was very similar to LeBron's, very all around. So if I had to choose, Jordan is obviously more of a pure scorer. And I would say Jordan has a bit more of a killer instinct.
Mm-hmm.
LeBron has a tendency to sometimes defer with his teammates a little bit more than Jordan. And just like Jordan's scoring ability, sometimes Jordan can get tunnel vision too when he's scoring. And that's a good and a bad thing. All right. Sometimes you forget about your players, and sometimes he's hot and he can forget about his players. Although he's got great passing ability. LeBron is the other way. LeBron, sometimes he tries to defer, and most of the time it's great. He makes great decisions. Once in a while, you would actually wish that he would actually try to be a bit more aggressive to look for his own shots. Because by doing that, because he's so dominant, that when LeBron, if you see, for example, he's playing Boston and they were down in series, and then he came out and he just went crazy that game. Was it game 5? I remember? Game 5 or game 6?
I think his most dominant game, probably 2007 against the Pistons. We scored the 29 in the last 30 points.
The triple overtime? Mm-hmm.
Then the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston 2012. Right. Just dominated,
right? Exactly. Yeah. The thing about him is sometimes he has to realize that his teammates don't always have it. And I know sometimes in the beginning he wants to get his teammates involved because he knows he's going to need his teammates at the end of the game, which is very true. And even Jordan does that too. Jordan's learned through Phil Jackson and them to actually do that later on too. In the beginning, if you could, involve your teammates first. Get them engaged in the game. Get them hot. And then because by the end of the game, you might get double teamed. By the fourth quarter, the other teams might start double teaming you. That's when you need your players to be hot already so they can hit that open jump shot when you get them the ball. So LeBron's smart enough that he knows that. That's why he's trying to get his teammates involved. But sometimes you would notice that there's actually absolutely nothing going on for his teammates in the game, but he's still trying to make that pass when there's nothing there for them. And those are the times when there's nothing going on, like at all, then he should try to actually be more like MJ, and just open up the game, because the guy can morph in between Magic Johnson or Michael Jordan, or he can even be a Shaq if he wants to be, because he's so physically imposing. And it's so unfair for him to have such a big body and be so athletic that he can be like Shaq out there and just bully everybody else. So when there's nothing going on good for his team, and if his teammates don't have it, then you know what? Go be a Shaq. Go out there and just destroy them physically. And once you do that, it's going to open up everything else for your teammates anyways. So I think that's something that sometimes LeBron, like, he's so unselfish, which is a great thing, and I love him for that.
Yeah.
But just once in a while, I think, like he needs a little bit of prodding before he actually steps up once in a while. But of course, even when he's actually not completely in crazy stepping up mode, the guy's still amazing, obviously. But just sometimes you notice that between him and MJ, the difference is that Jordan, you would notice that all his final series, like I'm not talking about the finals record. Like for the most part, I do not hold LeBron's finals record against him. Mm-hmm. I think for the most part, it's an accomplishment that he's been to the finals so many times, that he's led that 07 Cavs to the finals. That's an accomplishment. Yeah. You shouldn't take that away from him, and say Jordan's, 6 for 6 in the finals and LeBron's not.
I think the people going cares about finals records it's stupid, because
it's stupid, yeah.
Like people who never make the playoffs, like you're gonna say it's better than not making the finals and losing. Like it doesn't make sense, right?
Exactly. So does that mean LeBron should purposely just miss the finals when he had the 07 Cavs team?
I know, right? His finals record would be better. but he missed the playoffs, so that doesn't make sense, right?
It doesn't make sense at all. I mean, the fact that he led that 07 team to the finals, that's a plus. You know, it should not be a knock on his legacy. That's a plus on his legacy, right? For example, with Jordan, you know, he couldn't get past the Pistons.
Mm-hmm.
And if Jordan actually if Jordan, say, one of those years before the 91 championship, say in 89 or 90, say in 89, and then if he actually got past the Pistons with a much more shabby team before Scottie Pippen was developed, and then he loses in the finals, say to the Lakers, well, hey, that's an accomplishment, right? That can't be a knock on him,
exactly.
Right? That's exactly what LeBron did. He was able to take a team that wasn't even ready yet to the finals, and that's an accomplishment. So I hate that debate in terms of like their finals records, 6 for 6.
Honestly, I think that only came up because LeBron was encroaching on the GOAT conversation. Before that, no one cared about finals records. Okay, it only came up when LeBron started becoming in the conversation, and then Jordan fans or maybe Kobe fans, like they started, you know, they don't like that, so they had to bring up some reason why LeBron can't be considered in that conversation, so they bring up finals records, right?
Right, exactly. So I hate that argument. However, the one thing though that you would notice is special about Jordan though is that in all his finals, he's never had to go to Game 7. So he was 1-5 and 6-game series for all the rest. 5 for the first one against the Lakers, 6-game series for all the other ones. He's never ever had to face elimination in the finals. So I think that is one thing that, and that goes back to the mindset, because with LeBron, what I mentioned, the guy's amazing. You know, I love LeBron, but at the same time, sometimes he needs the other team to actually really piss him off, or just completely just keep prodding him until he finally steps up to wake him up. It's almost like, you know, it's like you're waking up the giant, and LeBron kind of needs that sometimes. And sometimes, you know, you have to have the other team just put his back against the wall, and his team's facing elimination, and then all of a sudden LeBron comes up and he goes crazy, and he normally really does step up for his team in those situations. And what I would like LeBron to do is kind of don't even need to get into that situation, you know, because sometimes I find he puts his team or himself in that situation where he's always trying to win the hard way, because, you know, he's trying to pace himself in the beginning and ends up during a hole, and then he's got another 2 or 3 years, and then he steps up. But I would like him to not even put himself in that hole and just come outright and just have that killer's mentality. That's something that Jordan has. Jordan, during his championship eras, he's never faced that many elimination games. At all.
Well, there's one thing I have to say about that is, so I feel like in general, LeBron has faced tougher teams than Jordan has in the finals. There's some exceptions, obviously, 2011 finals, that's one LeBron should have won. But, I mean, the 2014 Spurs, the 2017 Warriors, I don't think any of Jordan's teams were that good. I mean, like, those were dominant finals teams, right? Like the 2014 Spurs, they beat their opponents by like record margins. 2017 Warriors went 15-1 in the playoffs. I mean, those are dominant teams. So I'm not sure if Jordan, what was Jordan's best? Probably maybe the Showtime Lakers or the Jazz. Probably they were the best opponents.
I wouldn't say so. I would say Jordan's best opponents in the finals were either the Portland Trailblazers in '92 or the Phoenix Suns in '93. Because the league was actually a lot more stronger during his first 3 championships, in my opinion. And the league was actually weaker in the second 3 championships. And that's the reason why, if you actually compare, for example, during the first 3 championship era of the Bulls, during the early 90s, the Utah Jazz team was still around with Stockton and Malone at the time during the first 3 championships. The team actually arguably might even be a little bit better during the first 3 championships, that Utah Jazz team. But they never made the finals, because there was too much competition during that time.
And the Sonics too, yeah, they're good.
Yeah, there's too much competition. I mean, you had the Lakers, and you had Spurs, you had Hakeem in the Rockets. There was just a lot. And Portland Trailblazers was an amazing team during the first 3 championships. They were an amazing team.
2 finals during that time. Yeah.
Totally stacked. That's why the Jazz never really had a chance to make the finals against these teams back then. So Portland Trailblazers '92, I think, in my opinion, was their toughest competition in the finals. And second would be Phoenix Suns, because Phoenix Suns was so stacked offensively. They're really talented as well, but I don't think Phoenix's execution was quite as good as Portland's. Portland, I think, had it all. They had toughness. They had a lot of talent. They were stacked. They had Clyde Drexler and a bunch of other guys, Terry Porter. a lot of really good players that were tough, and they had a great coach in Rick Adelman. So yeah, very, very, very tough team.
No, 96
So
Sonics. They took 72. I mean, 72-10 Bulls. They took them to 6 games. It's pretty
mhm.
impressive.
Well, but if you actually really, really watch that series, you can tell the Sonics never had a chance. Because the Bulls were up 3-1 in the series. They were up 3-1 in the series quite easily, and then Sonics actually just stepped up and won 2 games, and then Game 6 wasn't even close after that. And I think the biggest difference is they matched up really well against the Sonics, and also I don't think Sonics as a team, their execution wasn't. They had a really good defense. The Sonics had a good defense, and in that series, the one thing that they had against the Bulls that worked was Sean Kemp. In that whole series, the Bulls didn't have anybody that can stop Sean Kemp. And Kemp just went crazy against them. He was a good matchup against the Bulls. But all their other strengths were actually shut down by the Bulls. They didn't match up well against the Bulls anywhere else on the court. For example, Gary Payton offensively was pretty much shut down for the whole series. And a lot of the other players just couldn't get going.
Defended Jordan pretty well, though.
Yeah, he guarded Jordan pretty well. I mean, Jordan didn't have a particularly great series. Of course, he just came back from baseball, so he wasn't in his best shape. In my opinion, MJ was actually in better shape in 97 than he was in 96, which a lot of people didn't know. But at the same time, Gary Payton couldn't get off his offense. And I don't think their execution was really that great either. I don't think George Karl was really that known for his offensive execution. So if you actually watch, they didn't really have much of a system, the Sonics. And because of that, it really wasn't much of a challenge for the Bulls. But the Blazers team, that was actually a pretty big challenge. That was a really big challenge for the Bulls because they had good execution, toughness, defense, they were stacked. And I would say that Portland Trail Blazers team is every bit as good as perhaps that Golden State team. And yeah, that they were really stacked. I mean, now LeBron, the teams that he's lost to, though, I would argue that Jordan's never faced. I would argue that Bo's team, they've never faced as good of a team as the ones that LeBron lost to.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. The 2017 Warriors, that's an incredibly stacked team. Like,
I mean, the Warriors team with Kevin Durant. Okay, I don't think the Bulls have ever faced anything like that. I don't think anybody's ever faced anything like that. So yeah, that. But in terms of the teams that LeBron actually beat, I think that Portland Trailblazers team is actually quite comparable. The only team that LeBron's actually beat in the finals.
Between the 79 Warriors.
Yeah. The pre KD Warriors. Yeah. So LeBron also had a tough too. If you really compare the two of the careers, Jordan actually had a lot more stability in his career than LeBron had. He was drafted onto, the same team, and he stuck with them. Give Jordan credit too, because they kept losing in the beginning, but Jordan actually kept sticking with it because he's so competitive. But at the same time, he had Scottie Pippen that was developed later on by around 91, and he had Phil Jackson. Doug Collins too before Phil Jackson. Doug Collins was a very good coach. Doug Collins was a very nice coach. And I think Doug Collins was kind of your great coach that got them from, point A to point B. And then Phil Jackson, along with that Bulls coaching staff of Johnny Bach and Tex Winters, and then later on Jim Clemens, was one of the best coaching staff you'll ever get in history. And that's the championship coaching staff. They got them from point B to point C. And the thing is, MJ had the benefit of actually playing in a system under a great championship caliber coach from earlier on. Whereas LeBron, he never had much help in Cleveland. The organization didn't give him much. And he had to move on other places with no stability. And he always had to play for rookie coaches or pretty new coaches. And he actually would still win championships.
He never had a Hall of Fame coach like Jordan or Kobe did. Yeah.
Exactly. He never had a Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame system. Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you see every other player that won multiple championships had that. I mean, Kareem, Magic, you had Pat Riley.
Yep.
Michael Jordan, obviously, Phil Jackson. Kobe Bryant won all his championships with Phil Jackson. Shaq had either Pat Riley or Phil Jackson.
It's true.
I mean, Tim Duncan has Greg Popovich.
The only top 5 player that didn't have a Hall of Fame coach.
Yeah. Well, I would also argue that Hakeem Olajuwon too. I would say, from what I can see, from all these superstars that actually won championships, Hakeem Olajuwon and LeBron pretty much had it the toughest. Like they never had the best teammate to develop with them. LeBron had to go and find his teammate because his team never gave him anyone. So he had to go find it, and he never had the coach. He never had the coach. In my personal opinion, Frank Vogel is probably the best coach he's ever had. I've always been a big fan of Frank Vogel. Um, ever since he was in Indiana, I've always kind of wished that LeBron had a coach like Frank Vogel.
Hmm.
So that's why this off season, when they're choosing coaches, I actually silently, my gut was telling me that I wanted Vogel. So I was really happy when they actually got him, because Vogel actually runs a good system. He actually runs a system where they share the basketball, and he's got a good vision. He's got attention to details on both ends of the floor, defensively and offensively. So they actually play. They have a nice flow in the game from Frank Vogel. So I'm happy with that. But prior to Vogel, I don't think he's ever had a coach of that caliber that a lot of these other great players had. So you got to give LeBron credit that he can actually win championships, regardless, of not being in such a great situation and always playing for like rookie coaches and whatnot. And
Yeah, I
that's a huge
was,
accomplishment for LeBron.
yeah, and I also wanted like just
Mhm.
that probably Anthony Davis right now is, I would say, probably the best teammate he's ever had. I
I
mean,
think so.
because when people look at
Mhm.
it, they think, oh, LeBron joined super teams, Wade and Bosh, and Kyrie and Love. But it's so Bosh and Love are not, to me, like they're not like the
Mhm.
first rate kind of superstar guys.
Right.
Kyrie was kind of, I think people know by now that Kyrie's not really he's not a really good player to play with. Like he's kind of like a toxic player actually.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
he's yeah. So I wouldn't consider him like that top rate superstar that LeBron really needs. Wade was probably the best teammate he had before AD, but the problem with Wade was he declined after 2012, and he
Hmm.
started getting injured.
Right.
So he didn't. He probably had like half, maybe like 2 years of Wade's prime. That was it.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
so that's the thing that people don't really get is that yeah, he made a super team, but how much of the people's primes did you really get out of that, right? So
Hmm.
AD, that's
Exactly.
is purely in his prime. So that's I would say
Right.
that's best teammate. And it's kind of unfortunate that the NBA suspended the season, but
Hmm.
hopefully they'll get back up, and
I hope
we
so.
can see what LeBron and AD can finally do in the playoffs, right?
I hope so, because I mean LeBron doesn't have too many years left, and every year counts. So
I know
I
it would be a
really think
total waste if they didn't.
I think the NBA is, in my opinion, what the NBA has to do is they have to realize that don't worry about conflicting your schedule with NFL or any other league. Don't worry about it. Just finish the playoffs. At least have a season and finish it off. Because even if you have your playoffs running at the same time as NFL, it's
Hmm.
still better than not having it. So just have it and finish it off. And I think they have to focus on that. And just depends on when this virus thing actually clears up. But hopefully soon. Hopefully sometime they're saying in late June, maybe by the earliest. Maybe they can get something going. But I really hope so. I really hope so.
Cool.
And if we're gonna have to also take a look and compare uh, MJ and LeBron, the other thing is, like we mentioned, LeBron, the stuff he's accomplished without having such a great Hall of Fame coach
Hmm.
in his career is just amazing. Jordan's had the benefit of being in a proper system all those years, that stability. But at the same time, one thing that I've noticed that Jordan has, that Michael has, if you really want to break down the two games, LeBron is bigger, stronger. Obviously, we all know that. He has a bit more of a point guard mentality, which is very good sometimes. I've noticed that LeBron, when you give him very little, he can still elevate his teammates because he's such a great point guard, and he can make everybody around him better. So, and LeBron is just so unselfish on the court, and you would notice almost every team that LeBron goes to, the team chemistry is always great. Almost every team that he goes to, they always have a positive locker room almost most of the time. So all that is great. Jordan is a little bit different. Not to say Jordan doesn't elevate his teammates, but he doesn't elevate them in the same way that LeBron does as a point guard. I find that Jordan elevates his teammates in a different way in terms of being demanding and having high standards. So because when you're playing with MJ, you're gonna have to prove to him that you have heart, and that because '90s basketball and '80s and '90s basketball is a completely different beast compared to now. '80s and '90s was a lot more aggressive, a lot more physical,
Yeah.
a lot more physical, and you're literally going to war when you're playing playoff '80s and '90s basketball. So when Jordan actually when you want to be a teammate of Jordan's, you're gonna have to prove to him you're tough enough. And you're tough enough to actually go to war with him every night in the playoffs against these teams like the New York Knicks and the Detroit Pistons. So Jordan's going to test you. And because of Jordan's pretty much how demanding he is, he pretty much brings the best out of his teammates throughout practice and everything. Everyone's going to be on point during practice. because MJ is not going to let that type of stuff slide. So they both elevate their teammates in different ways. MJ, though, I would say is quicker than LeBron. In a half-court setting, MJ has the better ability to break down his defenders in a half-court setting. And Jordan also has a better natural mid-range game. Ever since he was a rookie, Jordan was a natural mid-range scorer. He always had a mid-range jump shot, and he was just deadly in the mid-range. Whereas I think LeBron, he developed that and got better and better, and now he's really deadly in the mid-range now as well, along with the three-point shot.
Yeah.
Defensively, they're both very similar when they're young. They're both great defensively. One thing, though, that Jordan had that I find LeBron doesn't completely have is you would notice that Jordan probably has a stronger ability to focus. From me watching both of these guys play, I watched almost all their games, both of these guys.
I feel
Jordan
like
and
LeBron isn't. He was a good defender in his Miami days, but after that he kind of slacked off. And that's somewhere where I think Jordan never really slacked off when he was with Chicago. His defense, like you said, he was more focused on that, right? I feel like LeBron sometimes, especially in like regular season, he doesn't care that much.
But maybe nowadays, this year he was playing very good defense.
Yeah, this year
LeBron played great defense.
I was talking about I mean,
the last couple years
with Cleveland, his second stint, right? He wasn't as focused as he was in Miami, right? So that's whereas Jordan, I think he'd be focused like all the time, whatever teammate situation you'd be in, right?
Right. But in terms of the focusing, what I also mean is in terms of the turnovers, it's very rare when you watch Jordan play that he actually makes a mental error or that he actually commits a turnover. Like Jordan seems super focused when he plays. This ability of his where he's never clumsy, he never loses the ball really, and he just has very little turnovers. Whereas I find LeBron has a tendency to sometimes make a mistake and would commit more turnovers than Jordan, and that's a pretty big thing. Because sometimes in a big game, when both teams are tense, if you can give the ball into Michael Jordan's hands, and he guarantees you he's going to at least get a solid shot off, or whatnot, and he's not going to lose the ball on you, then that's a big thing in a tight game when the pressure's on. Whereas LeBron, sometimes I've noticed that his rate of turnover is a little bit higher, and he just fumbles the ball a little bit more compared to MJ. Jordan had better ball handling. And overall, I would say Jordan had a little bit better footwork than LeBron. So with the agility and the ball handling, because Jordan's hands were very, very big, we have to remember. The guy's got crazy $1 million hands. So when Jordan actually has the fundamentals of the footwork and the dribbling skills along with those big hands, it's almost unfair when you play against Jordan, because a lot of the guys in the modern NBA, say roughly around when Allen Iverson came in the league and early Kobe Bryant, during that time, early on, the league actually never called carrying and palming of the ball very much. So guys like Kobe, when he was a rookie, and also Allen Iverson really abused that, and they were like carrying the ball all the time, doing these crazy crossovers. And then the league clamped down on it later on. And that's when you notice that all these players, they couldn't do as many of those moves anymore later on. But Jordan, with those big hands, never need to do that. Jordan, if you actually watched him play, was very fundamental, and he rarely does palm the ball because he doesn't have to. His hands are so big that he actually holds it kind of like it's like it's a grapefruit. So his hands are quite often on top of the ball or a little bit to just off to the side, whereas not carrying at all is legal. But he can still hold it so tightly that he can change directions when he's actually dribbling and just completely deke out the defender. You literally do not know where he's going to go because he's holding it like a tennis ball. And that's just unfair. And that's something that, most players don't even have. Most players, for example, if you're going to do a crossover with small hands, once I'm going one way, I'm going to have to commit to it because my hand's not big enough to really just hold it and then go all over the place, But then Jordan actually holds it like that, where literally he can go like this and that, and you're not sure which way he's going when he's dribbling. And that's a huge advantage that Jordan has. So these fundamentals that he has with the footwork, the large hands, and the ball handling, you would notice that even with the tougher defense in the 90s, Jordan always seemed to be able to go anywhere he wanted on the court, even when there was no pick and roll. Because they didn't have much pick and rolls back in the 90s. He was playing in the triangle for the Bulls and a lot of isolation for MJ. And even when that happened, and with hand checking and the tough defense, Jordan still was able to get anywhere he wanted. No problem on the court. You would notice that. and it's just his fundamentals and footwork and the big hands. So that's something that's really unique with Jordan. And so he really knows how to draw fouls back in the day.
Yeah.
It's a different league. I mean, and back in the 90s, the defense is so much more tougher. That when MJ scores 50 points back there in that time, those are really 50 points when he scored. Because not only did you have hand checking on the outside and tough defenders, you also had big men camping down low back in the 90s, just waiting to hit you if you go inside. Whereas nowadays, the paint's wide open because the big men, they can't camp down there anymore. And they also have that line there, the no offensive charging line down there, where if you see the big man and he's standing, within that line, you run into him, there's a good chance that, it's going to be their foul. But that line didn't exist back in the NBA. So any big man could just camp down in the paint back then, just waiting for MJ to go through. So imagine back in the 90s and the 80s when Jordan was playing, there's no pick and rolls pretty much. There were pick and rolls, but there weren't as much as now. So he would literally have to get past his defender himself that was using hand checking on him. And once he gets in, there's like a power forward in the center down there waiting for him just to hammer him. And chances are you can run into him or they can come into you and there's still going to be no calls. There's a lot of no calls back in the NBA.
Right.
Whereas nowadays you see the big man and the heel of his foot is actually on that line down there in the paint. And if I run into him, chances are it's his foul, and I'm going to get free throws. So nowadays is a much more easier way to score now. No hand checking now. So nowadays, pretty much with no hand checking, automatically the defender has to give you space because with no hand checking, they can't keep up with you if you try to drive. So automatically now everybody gets 2 to 3 feet of space now. And that's why you see players like Stephen Curry now. They can just pop up and take a shot anytime they want. Whereas in the old NBA with hand checking, the defender can come up on you now. And when they do that, they take out your airspace. There's no room to get off those shots in the old NBA. Right. So it's a totally different ballgame. So yeah, if you want to compare these two guys, both are just amazing in their own rights. And just like what I mentioned. So even now, I honestly can't tell you who I'm going to choose or who I could choose. But if I break it down, that's pretty much it. I mean,
cool.
LeBron, bigger, stronger, more point guard skills. Jordan, though, I would say quicker and better focusing ability, less turnovers, more of a killer instinct. I would say Jordan is more of a natural shooter. LeBron by percentage has become a very good three-point shooter nowadays. But in the mid-range, that jump shot form, Jordan had a more pure jump shot form, if you really want to compare. For example, LeBron, when he shoots, even now, quite often, his elbow is a little bit too far out. Yeah. And because of that, he tends to miss shots a little more easily. Whereas MJ, especially in the last 3 championships, had almost a perfect jump shot form. His elbows are in, everything's good. I think that's where MJ becomes more robotic on his shot. He's almost like a robot in the last 3 championships, MJ, when he's shooting. And that's something I wish that LeBron's getting really good at his 3-point shot right now, really good. But I would wish that if he can just get his elbow in a little bit more, because you would notice when LeBron's shooting, once your elbow's out, quite often sometimes you're shooting off of the wrong finger too. And because of that, sometimes your shot can go all over the place. But once you get your elbows in, and then your fingers, the rotation is going to be in the correct fingers when you take the shot, it's going to be a lot more consistent. So I really wish LeBron can work on that last part. So with LeBron, I wish he can work on his ball handling and also just get that elbow in. Ball handling, elbow in, and maybe work in the post a little bit more. Because as you get older, it's probably better to actually work on the post a little bit more as opposed to always playing on the outside. If you can work on these 3 things, I'd be really happy.